Last week was in Orlando for the FSSA. Chuck, we had a lot of conversations at the booth. What was something that stood out to you as something maybe different that we were hearing this year versus in previous years?
One of the big things that I heard is just everybody's kind of cautiously optimistic from a macro level that we're going to have a better year in 26, whether it be rates or occupancy. Things are kind of trending in the right direction from a macro level in the self-storage industry. I think it does sound like we'll have more facilities trading, so more active buyers and sellers in the marketplace. So that's always interesting to see how that impacts the self-storage industry as a whole. But so there's obviously a ton of competition. I think the development cycle is certainly slowed, so there's not quite as much new development. But still, I think operators just need to really focus on how they maximize their occupancy and ultimately their rental rates to generate the largest NOI. It'll be interesting to see as we approach Memorial Day, kind of the Super Bowl of leasing season in self-storage, see how that all plays out and kind of what kind of velocity we see. But one of the questions I think that certainly continue to come up is how can some of the regional operators or even the mom and pops and some of the smaller operators, from a marketing perspective, how can they compete with obviously the REITs or some of the large operators, but how can they sort of level the playing field, if you will, to compete with those for renters and tenants coming in the door?
There's only a limited number of spots at the top of Google. How do I make sure I'm consistently there? What surprised me too is I think we had a lot more conversations with actual in-house people that handle the marketing. I think we actually had some great conversations with those that were managing it in-house, maybe a little frustrated with Google's recommendations or things that they were hearing. And there's just a lot of information out there about the best way to run Google ads. And the biggest piece of advice that we've been giving is just to be super targeted and super granular about the types of words that you want to show up with, and making sure that those budgets are not just set it and forget it, and not just based on like a fixed number that you want to set and say, I have 20 grand for the year and that I'm going to spend that 20 grand. I think that is how the big folks operate. They just have a big bucket. And so when it comes to winning, beating them at that game, it takes more precision. It takes more flexibility. It takes more really being smarter with that money. If you have it set up correctly, where you're really targeting the core keywords, then it just becomes a budget game, and making sure you're not leaving search on the table when it's peaking, and you're not advertising when you don't have a lot of inventory. So if you start to get into 85-90% occupied, it's time to cut that down. Sometimes it's a matter of the radius and the targeting around you. One really cool thing we've done, and I've seen one of our customers do, is look at the actual tenant maps of their current tenants and where their addresses are, and instead of maybe just sending a 5-mile radius, being a little more strategic about where those ads are shown, and try to find those key areas versus just saying, I'm just going to target the city of Orlando. Really being strategic with that targeting is a way you can kind of beat those larger people, rather than just trying to outspend them.
Your point on the maps and seeing where your existing customer base is coming from is just smart in general. Just to continue to monitor that and say, wow, look at this pocket here. 75% of our customer base is coming from this area. Is there more demand in that area? So I think just utilizing the tools that are out there and being super and hyper focused on kind of where you're spending your search dollars is going to be a huge win and a huge advantage to help those smaller and mid-sized operators compete with the big boys.
Yeah, I think the other big question we kept getting was attribution. People are using Google Analytics, they're using the Google dashboard, they might be using maybe a custom dashboard they've built in-house, they have their FMS data. There's all these things that sometimes don't talk to each other.
Sure.
And so the customer journey of a self-storage customer is a complicated one. It's so different with somebody clicking on an ad, maybe on their cell phone, and then they go online to actually book it on their desktop, or vice versa. They look for directions or make a phone call. All those different touch points make it really difficult for just the out of the box Google Analytics setup that most people try to deploy and say, well, look, I don't get any data here. That's a lot why we've focused on different data points inside of AdRank, which are more focused on that relationship between dollars spent, clicks received from those dollars, and making sure you're targeting the right people. And what is the effect of the move-ins and move-outs on that particular location? By getting those two pieces of data together, you can be directionally correct in how you're estimating the return on your ad spend, and getting that to help you make more decisions on should you spend more or spend less based on that type of view versus I need to see if I got 100 clicks, I need to know exactly how many of those turned into this. So that was a big thing that we had a lot of good discussions in the booth about that. Like, how do you actually track this stuff? And I wish I had an easy answer, but it is a very complicated problem that, the more you kind of keep things together and keep things tight, the better you can actually try to answer that question.
And our CEO, Jason Zickler, says, it's the holy grail. If we could get to it and say, well, we know specifically that customer, their only click came from a Google ad, that would be ideal. But with self-storage just being such a demand-driven business, nobody wakes up thinking, today's the day I'm gonna get self-storage. It's always a life event, whether it be a marriage or a child or a divorce. They may look at a click or click on an ad today, but then complete their rental transaction later in the week. Just makes it so challenging.
Right.
What kind of tools does AdRank have that might be able to assist operators or owners in kind of closing that gap to help maybe attribute or estimate kind of where those ads are coming from or where those tenants are coming from?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is using your FMS as the source of truth. If you can have attribution inside your FMS, I know certain ones can, certain ones can't. That is where if you can have the data actually be passed in there, whether it's being tracked via a cookie on your website, so it's maybe tracking all the different ways that person came to your website and passing that information into the FMS, that's the most powerful way. Rather than relying on just like, did they view a certain page or did an event get triggered or not? There's a lot of different ways people can block those and different browser settings, things like that can mess with that data. That's why we use that data inside AdRank, to use that as the source of truth versus, Google Analytics or other pieces of data that might be, not as accurate or not as reliable as your true FMS data.